Dear IPAM members, partners, and friends, my name is Karim Gay from the Foundation AAA Initiative, providing the Secretariat for IPAM. Today, we are delighted to present the second IPAM policy paper out of the 4 submitted at COP28. This milestone highlights the core of our work and the collective efforts of our sectoral committees on agriculture, cities, water, and techniques and tools. The development of indicators is at the heart of our mission, and this policy paper exemplifies the seamless collaboration within our organization. IMAL, one of our esteemed member organizations, has taken the lead in spearheading this study, while representatives from each of the 4 committees have contributed their invaluable expertise and findings. This policy paper offers a comprehensive insight into IPAM's operational dynamics, showcasing how our members work hand in hand to achieve our shared goals. It is a testament to the dedication and commitment of our diverse community. Today, we have discussants from Canada, Spain, UK, Morocco, Kenya, and India. I'll now hand it over to our chair, Carl Schulz, to share the latest IPAM updates and kick off today's session. Please, Carl, the floor is yours. Carl, you're muted.
Oh, thank you, Karim. So I'd just like to give you a little bit of context before we jump into the meat. What should be, I think, a very interesting set of work on thematic targets and indicators. Try to tell you a little bit about IPAM and some of the work we've been doing in policy over the past 6 months. So IPAM stands for the International Platform on Adaptation Metrics. We are a truly diverse group. We come from 5 different continents. We represent 111 different individual members. And as you can see from this map, we're from 36 different countries. We also represent both the North and the South, and we're a truly collaborative group. There's no real hierarchy here. If you're interested in IPAM, I'd like to point you to our website. It would give you an opportunity, if you're so interested, to work on joint projects, network with people who have very similar interests or complementary interests, and learn about a variety of different activities and events, including some member-only activities, along with, of course, being engaged in all of these activities. So to join, you can just express your interest either as an organization or an individual or both. Sign the charter, note what specifically interests you as it relates to adaptation metrics, and participate in our activities. That's my sales pitch. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about how this work around thematic targets and indicators fits into a broader set of policy work that we've been doing over the past 6 months. But to put it into context, why is IPAM so interested in this? I think one thing that we can really be proud of is that we're really not representing a party or industry or a distinct set of stakeholders or initiatives, except for those who are enthusiastic or engaged in questions around adaptation metrics. So, as I think most everyone who's on this particular webinar will know, COP28 came up with some, I think, rather interesting and impactful decisions related to adaptation. Notably, the UAE Climate Resilience Framework, which outlined 7 thematic or sectoral targets and 4 targets around the adaptation planning cycle. However, I think if you look at the decision document, there's a lot of work to be done. And that work, to a great extent, relates to addressing the questions over what are the indicators that are going to inform these targets. So this is where IPAM believes it has a role and wants to contribute. In the lead up to the COP28, we prepared 4 separate papers, or one could say 3 papers and 1 policy statement. We looked at different options that were identified in a rather good compilation and synthesis document that UNFCCC prepared. But we tried to outline some of the themes and the methods and approaches and analyze how they may be beneficial, but also what might be missing. We also wrote a paper, and these are all led by what we call our working groups. So these are member-led organizations, member-led individuals who just work together. Then we also prepared a paper on the boundaries between adaptation metrics and another major area where there's been progress, and that's related to loss and damage, to try to understand the interfaces between adaptation metrics and loss and damage metrics, and consider how there could be coordinated measurement. It's not necessarily all complementary. It's not necessarily all duplicated, right? But there needs to be coordination was a large part of that particular paper. And that's going to be the subject of an upcoming webinar. We also, on the 29th of February, gave a webinar where we summarized IPAM's statement on metrics for global goals. There's another working group that came up with its views regarding how we should really be looking at metrics for global goals. What are the specific considerations when assessing those? Today, we are here to talk about thematic targets and indicators of the GGA and consider perspectives from 3 of the subsectoral committees of IPAM: agriculture, cities, and water. I'm not going to say much more about that because that's the subject beyond here. But I want to talk a little bit about the near-term future, what we're doing right now and have been doing over, since COP28. We were asked, in effect, how would the work program that's going to take place over 2 years, called the UAE Belém Work Program on Indicators for the Global Goal on Adaptation, how should this work program be organized? And what would be the substantive issues and approaches towards evaluating indicators that could be forwarded? And so to do this, we formed 2 different expert working groups, one led by Joel Smith that focused on the approach that worked on an indicative indicator under one of the thematic targets to see how that approach might work and what we learned from that could inform the work of this work program. Well, the second group focused on the process and also a lot of substantive questions related to the process of designing this work program. It was led by Mansadi of IMAL Initiative. We submitted our comments just last week. And I'm hoping that we can let everyone know very soon about a webinar that's going to cover more substantively what we did there. But today, I'd like to hand the floor over to Iskander, who's the president of the IMAL initiative, to lead us through the work of this thematic targets and indicators paper that was prepared and I think will be of interest to you all. Over to you, Iskander.
Well, thank you very much, Carl, for setting the scene, and hopefully, indeed, the topic will be of interest to you all, and that's why you've joined today. Good to see faces old and new, and obviously looking forward to seeing this all reach a greater audience when diffused later online. So without further ado, maybe I'll just jump into the PowerPoint that I've prepared. I wonder, I can share my slides unless you would prefer that to do so yourself, Kerim.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. If you have problems, I do it.
All right. So I'll get started, and if there are any technical problems, do let me know. So yeah, picking up where Carl left off. So Carl took us right up to the minute in sort of noting some of the engagements that that IPAM had been doing very recently within the frame of the now launched UAE to Belém work program, which I'll say a few more words on later. But this paper that we're talking about today is interesting because in many ways it kind of came before that work program was set up and anticipated its creation before it was created. So the work program is about indicators for the GGA essentially, and that is precisely what this paper that we did last year is about. So just a few more words on where we are in the process and the context, and this will become relevant again later in the discussion. So essentially, in the context of the Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh work program on the global goal on adaptation, COP27 put forward a new text for proposed thematic targets and dimensional targets for the GGA. And when the GGA framework was agreed at COP28, it essentially established and formalized those both thematic and dimensional targets. So the thematic targets cover essentially sectors, of which there are a good many. And I think we'll talk about the ones in which we addressed as IPAM, but there are quite a few that we obviously haven't had the chance to yet. But so, for instance, there's a thematic target around water scarcity. There are others around urban settlements, around health, around culture and heritage, and so on. And then the other targets, and this is also of relevance to our paper, are the dimensional targets, which essentially cover different phases of the adaptation policy cycle, all the way from initial risk assessment, all the way through to like post hoc monitoring and evaluation of actions taken, and obviously implementation in the middle, and planning. And yeah, so we have the work program that has now been launched, and hopefully we'll get into a bit more depth in sort of discussing how this paper and this body of ongoing work relates to that. But the operative text, yeah, is to develop, well, identify and as needed develop, and we'll come back to that, indicators and potential quantified elements for the targets mentioned above. So this paper, we wanted to try to be helpful to to the negotiations and hopefully set a basis for the work that would follow the COP, with doing a paper around the principally indicators for the thematic targets, although the dimensional aspect came back again later, and I'll revisit that in a moment. But just to acknowledge that this was very much a collaborative effort, and to name a number of the different authors and contributors. You can see their names on this slide, but suffice to say, it was quite a few, both on specific thematics as well as cross-cutting support. And as a think tank that's following the negotiations at email, we were very happy to just play a facilitative role, in some cases contributing intellectually as well, but principally it was about bringing expertise to bear for the negotiations. So I'll just touch on a few of these, and then I'll try to adhere to time because we're running a bit over, but to let the different representatives of IPAM's different committees come in on the different areas, and to say more on these. So I won't go into exhaustive detail on each of them. Suffice to say, and I think have Marta on the line who will speak to this a little later on, and possibly others. The cities, IPAM Cities Committee had a legacy of work that it had initiated a couple of years ago, actually, which I think gains additional importance in the light of this UN COP process around the GGA. And so they've developed a scientific paper. You can see the citation below for those that are interested, and hopefully we'll hear more about that later today. But essentially, this offered some interesting insights, which I won't, in the interest of avoiding redundancy, I won't recount in too much detail. But essentially, it noted the sort of regional differences in the sort of landscape of indicators and metrics that were in use for cities, the sort of specific areas that were most common, and the kinds of maybe dimensions of adaptation policy at the sort of input level rather than at the outcome level. So yeah, just to acknowledge that. And then we also had insights provided from IPAM's Water Committee, and I think we have a couple of folks here today that might be able to speak to that. Hopefully, Sidris Wazar. And I mentioned before the linkage between the thematic and the dimensional. And here, one of the proposals, I think, if I remember rightly, it was from Lucy, was that to kind of disaggregate and classify within indicators that are attached to a particular thematic, we could essentially divide it up on the basis of dimensional categories. So the different stages of the adaptation policy cycle as identified in the relevant COP decisions. And so principally, these would be the assessment of vulnerability and risk. You can see here on the left-hand column, planning, implementation, and then monitoring and evaluation. These are the four as they are rendered in the COP text. Ultimately, means of implementation was not included in the GGA framework after considerable contestation between developed and developing countries in that respect. But from the standpoint of I think, classifying metrics and indicators, we I think found that a useful additional category. And then also vis-a-vis, I guess, picking the indicators that can work the best in terms of capturing meaningful change and outcomes rather than just inputs or outputs, but sort of outcomes in relation to the final target. That was also an important way to classify the indicators, and there's some overlap, of course, and these modes of categorization are by no means definitive, but just presented as a starter for conversation. Lastly, on the food and agriculture side, we and I think we have maybe Lucy and Syria possibly here today to speak to some of this. Equivalently, we put forward a number of proposed indicators that were divided along the lines of the dimensional stages of adaptation within the wider thematic of food and agriculture, which is one of the thematic targets, and corresponded to one of IPAM's three sectoral committees, the IPAM Agriculture Committee. So we really brought, I think, the three IPAM communities within the three sectoral committees and their membership and past work to bear. And I think the fruits are yet to be fully seen. And I think, as far as I understand it, negotiators will probably find some of this work only of increasing utility as we get into the work program. And so definitely one to revisit. In terms of the cross-cutting conclusions, obviously, as noted, there were a number of different ways in which indicators for adaptation could be approached or classified. And, I think it became very clear and will become clear in the work program that you have no shortage of potential indicators to select. The challenge is about how to prioritize and select among them and what the criteria should be. And so some of the initial conclusions here that Carl, as Carl alluded to, were built upon in the most recent IPAM submission to the UNFCCC on the work program and its design that happened this month. But in general, in this paper, in looking at the thematic indicators, a number of different criteria were identified. Obviously, looking at best available information on the degree to which some of these indicators were already in use, and what lessons could be drawn from those experiences of usage. Information on the sort of cost and feasibility in instituting and monitoring and evaluating according to these indicators from different contexts, with some obviously being more affordable than others, and obviously significance and impact. We mentioned that, and linkage to outcomes. But then also other areas as well, to just sort of build on this a little bit before handing over to our different sectoral perspectives. So in terms of existing practice and lessons from practitioners, I think one thing that was noted in particular was obviously existing experience with the SDGs, for example, and other frameworks currently being applied already, and avoiding redundancy. And yeah, some interesting insights given with respect to differentiating according to cost and feasibility. And there, I think that raises important questions for the work program about the resourcing that will be provided by climate finance contributors under the UNFCCC for all this monitoring and evaluation work, so that it doesn't entail a sort of infeasible burden for developing country governments with low capacity. Significance and impact was acknowledged, and there I think folks stressed the impacts on lives and livelihoods, impact on communities, and looking at the national level, looking specifically at perhaps the most vulnerable, and obviously this is important for reviewing the GGA's effectiveness over time. And then of course there's the tension between, on the one hand, being receptive to different policy contexts, where you have different adaptation realities in different geographies and different levels. So ensuring that that diversity is acknowledged, and avoiding one-size-fits-all approaches, but at the same time, nevertheless, needing a certain degree of either aggregatability or fungibility, transferability across different contexts. So yeah, I hope that's a useful start to the conversation. I'm going to stop here to allow for the different sectoral perspectives, and hopefully for some question and answers towards the end of the discussion. Thank you.
Well, Iskander, I'll let you monitor the rest of the session, maybe by sharing questions with our committee's representatives. Floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you, Kerim. So I don't want to be too prescriptive to the different representatives that are here from the different thematics. It's hopefully going to create a space for them to express their general reflections on the paper and the work that went into it, as well as hopefully any thoughts on the forward trajectory with the GGA process, if they're able to do so. But yeah, I don't know if we're able to potentially take it in the order in which it was presented. So maybe in the order of cities first, and then water, and then food and agriculture. If that works, then I would maybe initially invite I think Marta and potentially Samraj from the cities committee.
Yes, thank you, Iskander. Can you hear me well?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I had to connect with my phone because my PC was not working. I don't know why. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the introduction to the work that we did in the cities committee. As you mentioned, this study started 2 years ago, and we have been around 14 people doing the systematic review of indicators and metrics for urban adaptation across scientific literature. The work finally has been published as a preprint last week. I will share the link. I've seen that you have included it in the slide, thank you, but I will share it in the chat just for others to know about it a little bit better. It's been peer-reviewed in a scientific journal right now. And about the lessons learned that I can talk about, and I think that Samras wants to also speak a little bit about other topics later. But I just wanted to mention that it was really hard for us to gather information on indicators and metrics from scientific literature, because there is no much information on the context of how these indicators and metrics are being proposed to be used in cities. There is no very spread use of theoretical frameworks and models. Practically everything that we collected is empirical work, but mostly focused on formative assessments instead of summative assessments. So in other words, most of the indicators, or at least half of the indicators, are focusing on vulnerabilities assessments and risk assessments previous to the implementation of adaptation actions, instead of working on how to evaluate or assess the performance of adaptation actions. This was something that it was one of the main findings of the work. Also, the concentration of indicators and metrics in regions of Asia and Europe and North America too. We also saw how most of indicators and metrics are concentrated at city level instead of a smaller spatial scales, which also leads to some problems related to decision making out of the findings of such indicators and metrics, such as out of the measurement. And yeah, and as other scientific works have pointed out, most of the indicators and metrics that we have found focused on heat waves and floods, leaving other risks, climatic hazards aside. And many of them also focus on sectors of action related to land use planning, coastal management, water management, and leaving other sectors of action on adaptation behind. And I think that mainly the main findings, but I would like to emphasize the high complication in understanding how the scientific community is proposing these indicators and metrics to be used by local planners and decision makers and policy makers in real practice, because it seems that the way these indicators and metrics are being developed, there is still a way until the direct usability on the ground. So with that, I would like to pass the word to Samras. Thank you.
Thank you. Samras, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Iskander, for summarizing in that slide. And thank you, Martha, for taking the lead on this work and putting everything together to the present form that we have now. Okay. So this work, the findings of this work, basically, it serves two major purposes. First of all, the findings, it identifies the major gaps or the major shortcomings that are related to the existing indicators on the matrix, as well as the gaps related to the development of the indicator. And secondly, it also serves to, in a way, it compiles or collect together a pool of indicator for urban adaptation. So both these aspects are of great significance to the GGA landscape, mainly because cities and human settlement is one of the topics or one of the thematic area of GGA. Now, another aspect that I would like to highlight here is that this study is very much in line with the 2 years UAE BELEM work program, which essentially calls for identifying the indicators as well as, and if needed, development of the indicators. You know, if you look at the finding of these studies, especially the identification of the pool of indicator, that caters to the first need of UAE BELEM work program of identifying the indicators which are specifically for the GGA targets, mainly related to cities and urban settlements or other overlapping dimensions of other targets, like those of the related to water, health, or maybe livelihood, etc. And it also serves to for the target that are related to the dimensions of the iterative adaptation cycles. Okay, and at the same time, it also caters to the other aspect of the GGA, the BELEM work program, which is mainly related to development of the indicators. As the study highlights the major shortcomings, mainly related to the methodological approach such as the one like the lack of framework, or the regional disparities, or maybe disciplinary dominance of the specialization of the experts who are involved in the development of these indicators, and also the gaps which are that came out from the study, like the more focused on process and lack of outcome indicators. So all this serves as a learning, would serve as a learning for the work program, and as far the looking at the complexity and of the adaptation measures, and also the as you can say that since it's being more context specific, so it's very difficult to find out which one indicator is the best indicator out of the pool of indicator that the study collects. So maybe that require a systematic approach of evaluation using set criteria, like the one that IPAM has really come up with, the 3 set of criteria, which in its summation. And so as a future work, it could be like the pool of indicators that we have can be assessed for its relevance and adequacy for the different dimensions of the targets of the GGA, so that at the end we can have a set of indicator for each target for the GGA. So that's how I feel that this study can be a very useful contribution towards the UAE Vellum work program. Thank you. That's...
Well, thank you very much, Samarajan and Marta, and the link has been shared in the chat as well. So please do take a look at that, and I think it's very, very timely, and I think we're only going to come back to this in more detail in future. We could obviously spend a whole hour talking just about this one thematic area, but unfortunately we don't have the time. In the interest of time, let's move on now to our next thematic area, to food and agriculture, where we have representatives of IPAM's Agriculture Committee. Apologies for only bringing you in now, but Lucy, did I see that you were online? Yeah, Lucy, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just want to apologize very quickly for Riyadh. He was here, but he had to leave the half hour.
Great, more time for Lucy. Over to you, Lucy.
Okay, no problem. And thank you, Iskander and Karim and the rest of IPAM leadership for organizing this webinar. Indeed, it's, I think, a very good opportunity to reflect on what we proposed in these policy papers and what came out of COP28. And as Iskander, you highlighted also the roadmap that has been defined for the next 2 years. So I think this webinar is really timely, and hopefully we can also draw a lot of lessons that should inform the IPAM work moving forward. So I'm Lucy. I work for the Alliance of Biodiversity and SEAC, which is one of the CGIAR centers, focusing on our work focuses on tracking adaptation within the agriculture sector. And so our contribution to this policy paper was coming from the experience that we've had developing tools for tracking adaptation, supporting their use, especially by governments and also the private sector. And we are also very keen on how to support collaborations and learning to make sure that we are also reinforcing adaptation tracking across the scales, as much as we are also very much contributing to these global discussions on adaptation tracking. So looking back at the key ideas that we brought out in the agriculture piece of this policy paper, it's really, I think, commendable the fact that, as the standard you showed, for us, we had events specifically called out that we should have outcome indicators, because we were afraid that the practice so far has so much been on highlighting the actions that have been done, showing the inputs and outputs. But then we decided that we actually needed to call out the need for outcome indicators that can help us to assess the impacts of adaptation, so that we can get closer to actually assessing the effectiveness and adequacy of adaptation efforts across skills. But I think maybe what was unintended, or what we didn't foresee, is actually the fact that now, especially if you look at the thematic targets, there's so much focusing on outcome indicators, and they have sort of left out the other components, especially if you consider adaptation as a process. So if you look at the target 9B, as in the decision text, it's talking a lot about being able to assess how climate resilient food and agriculture systems are. If we have, for example, equitable access to food and nutrition, which these fit within the impacts or outcome indicators that we will have wanted to have. But at the same time, we need to actually be able to have a better balance of targets and corresponding indicators that can help us understand what are the adaptation processes that can actually lead us to attaining these outcomes. So reflecting back, I think we definitely managed to have a set of what we had proposed in this policy paper actually reflected in the targets, in the language of the targets. But as we move to work on the indicators, especially under the UAE PLM work program, I think we need to push the conversation a bit further so that we have a better balance of indicators that are actually measurable. Because with these outcomes, at the end of the day, they might take much longer to measure. So indeed, we need to have a better balance of indicators that can actually help us to understand the processes that are taking place across local, subnational, and global scales that can help us to get to the targets, the outcome targets that have been highlighted in target 9B of the GGA framework. And I think linking back to what the cities committee has highlighted based on their findings, with the fact that there are so many indicators that are out there, and I think a core or a common position across the policy paper was calling out the fact that we need to draw on these existing databases of indicators. And again, as has been reinforced by the cities group, there's lots of existing indicators out there. Even if you look at just cities, we've done an assessment of the agriculture sector, and it's a similar picture. But then, as they have mentioned, there lacks a comprehensive or a robust framework that can guide the identification or the selection of those indicators. And so, as maybe also as a new contribution to this discussion today, since the time we published these policy papers, we've been working quite more on the impact pathways, because the impact pathways, they help you to articulate what is your vulnerability context, what are the actions you're actually taking up to be able to respond to those climate risks, and what are your expected results. So by applying the impact pathways or theories of change, as is commonly known, especially in the language of the programs, they actually help you to articulate what are your priorities and then select the indicators with this as your reference point. And maybe I can share in the chat some of the work that we've published around the use of impact pathways, because I think even within the work program, we actually need to have a more robust and science-based approach to identifying what indicators are suitable for which context, which skills, and for which types of adaptation outcomes. And I think that way, then we can move beyond just identifying lists of indicators that might not be meaningful to actually identifying indicators that can align with the priorities and the vulnerability context that we have across all the themes, or even across all the countries, not limited to the food and agriculture thematic area. So I think I'll stop at that, and hopefully we can have time for questions and to see how we can best also share the work that we've been doing. Thanks so much, Iskander.
Well, thank you very much, Lucy, for the rich expertise and insights, and reminding us of the importance of obviously focusing on outcomes at the end of the day, but also acknowledging some of the difficulties involved and some of the need for a balanced approach. Without further ado, I'm going to pass to our final thematic perspective, and that would be on water. And I think here we have Sidris Wazar on the line, and possibly others. The floor is yours.
Idris, your mic is off. We also have Professor Seydu with us. Idris, your mic is off.
We can also take Professor Usman Seydu first if we're having technical issues.
Yeah.
Professor Usman.
Okay, so thank you for letting us come and share our insight. So I think we're facing a big challenge, because we need to find a list of indicators which is comprehensive, but it has to be succinct because we don't want to have too much work, give too much work to the countries. So, and we have to make sure reporting this indicator is consistent with the resources of all countries, because you have some underdeveloped countries which are struggling to make sense of the data they have. So that's quite complicated. And one of the challenges is the fact that an indicator has to speak to the stakeholder in order to take action. And there are hundreds of stakeholders, hundreds of points of view. So it's going to be very complicated to agree on what indicator are important. But if you think about it, what is an indicator? It's just a way of summarizing data. So I think that if instead of maybe focusing on indicator, we're focusing on the base data. If you have a collective database of information in which every stakeholder can go and then calculate the indicator of speaks to him, then it's going to be a little bit better. And so focusing on open data, maybe focusing on artificial intelligence and remote sensing in order to facilitate the reporting is something we might consider in the future. I don't know if this has solved his microphone issues. If not, I can continue. So
Sigrid?
Okay. Can I continue? Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Iskander, for this nice presentation. And I thank also Usman for his input. Can you hear me now? I hope.
Yes.
So this assessment of the progress of for meeting global goals of agriculture is really highly complex and do need a lot of attention, really. And this analysis is relevant because it will demonstrate a kind of a proof of concept for assessing the potential indicators, considering various criteria, such as their alignment with climate change adaptation, applicability, scalability, comparability, and agreeability, as already mentioned. Now, I will focus on more on water issues related to the thematic. So for the first component, we identified the identification of climate change adaptation, where economic water productivity aligned closely with climate change adaptation effort. Efficient water use in agriculture becomes increasingly vital as a climate variability intensifies. By focusing on maximizing agricultural output per unit of water utilized, this metric directly addresses resilience to changing climate conditions, making it highly relevant for adaptation strategies. Second one is wide applicability or applicability. Economic water productivity exhibit broad applicability across diverse agricultural systems and geographic regions, whether in water-stressed areas where optimizing water usage is critical, or in regions facing changing precipitation patterns. This metric offers a universal framework for assessing agricultural efficiency. And this is relevant for smallholder farms and also to large-scale agriculture, making it an inclusive measure for evaluating agricultural sustainability. Third dimension, scalable, comparable, and aggregable. The economic water productivity is inherently scalable, as it can be applied at various spatial and temporal scales, from individual farms to regional or national, maybe transboundary levels. Its quantitative nature facilitates easy comparison between different agricultural systems, allowing for benchmarks and performance evaluation. Furthermore, data on water productivity can be aggregated to provide insight at broader scales, enabling policymakers to track trends and formulate informed interventions efficiently. As my colleague and friend Usman mentioned, We notice here that the process is really highly data-driven and thus requires data for further investigations to finalize the proof of concept of the framework. And of course, open data can play an important role, but even if we have this open data, we still need some field investigation to calibrate what we have to do, to calibrate. I will stop there. Thank you, Iskander.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Dries, and also to Professor Usman. I think you've outlined some very key issues there concerning water, and even identified and proposed some key indicators there. So getting out on the front foot, and I think also giving a sneak peek into the proof of concept that was, I think, an appendix to the submission to the UNFCCC, looking at that specific indicator just recently. So I want to come back to. Thank you both for that. So now I think in the modest time that remains, we have some time for any question and answers from either the audience or indeed the speakers.
I just want to add that normally we have only 7 minutes left, but I'm happy to add 15 minutes or so if people are willing to engage in some discussion. Please feel free.
Thank you, Karim. I'll just add to your addition that unfortunately I have a commitment to be on another panel in 7 minutes, funnily enough, on the intersection of the GGA and the NCQG, the New Climate Finance Goal. And so my availability will unfortunately be curtailed, but very happy, obviously, for you to continue in my absence. But yeah, any questions that people would like to either raise their hands for or pose in the chat?
Looks like
So I think we're
everybody's
seeing. Yeah, I think people have to leave at the end of the hour, so we may not get as many questions as we anticipated. But hopefully there will be opportunities for people to continue to engage after this session with the different committees, and hopefully the way for them to reach out to them is clear through the existing IPAM channels. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. If not, I don't know if any of the speakers would like to put any questions or final reflections out there before we wrap up. Any reflections indeed on what's been said today from the different perspectives and how they relate? Carl, you raise your hand.
Well, I have a question that might be leading a bit, but so we have thematics, and then we have a policy planning cycle, and then we have indicators. I've seen all of these connected, but I haven't seen the whole, the totality. And I also recognize that different themes use different indicators, perhaps for the very same unit, right? So how do we pull this all together, or is that important?
All right, well, a leading question as promised from Carl. Anyone want to come in on that?
Can I say a few words?
Absolutely.
Carl mentioned something very important. In fact, it's an integrated system. It's a highly complex with many subsystems, and these subsystems are interrelated. So we have to have it as a clear picture in our mind. But of course, the basics release again the data for all the components, and then we will try to put the relationships between them. So we need, I think, careful examination of the overall architecture of the system, if I can say.
Thank you for that, Sidris. Useful as always to have your insights. We have, I think, maybe room for one further or maybe two final speakers if we're going to close at the hour. I don't know if anyone else would like to also respond to Carl's question.
Maybe I can add something. I don't think it's about the name of the indicator of the unit. It's about what is tracking. I mean, if you have two indicators, even if if you can use them to see the progress toward adaptation, even if it's not the same unit, it doesn't really matter. So that's why I think beyond indicator, we have to share database data, as Dres is saying, and everybody will be able to develop indicator which makes sense to him, but based on the same information, and then they're going to be coherent. So the ideal situation for us would be to have a huge database where you have the best data, not the indicator, and then you will plug in, everybody will plug in his application, and then pulls in his indicator, and it is going to tell him how it is evolving. So as a researcher, I'd prefer you give me the underlying data, or how do you say it in English, the best data rather than giving me the indicator, because now I can tweak it and make it the way I like it, and I can use it.
Very good. Thank you, Usman, and also Sidris for both being champions of the importance of data, access to data, and investment in data availability. I think that's as good a note as any to end on, and so I think with great thanks to all of the speakers. We may conclude there, and obviously until next time, it's a conversation to be continued. So that's it from me, and thank you.